and welcome back to another session of Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen, and this is my Conversations in Colour. In the last few sessions, I've been talking about colours as people have chosen them to describe their strengths and their weaknesses. This time, we're going to be looking at colour personalities. Now, what is colour personality? But before we start, I'd like to thank all of my viewers once again for watching these videos. I hope you're getting something out of them that is of interest to you. I'd also like to thank my new subscribers, and I hope that there will be many, many more of you. But please, if you have anything to say about these topics, leave a comment. I'd love to hear how you consider colours to be of importance in your life. Before we begin to discuss colours as personalities, I'd like to make another caveat, and that is that when I speak about colour personalities, I am not referring to skin colour, eye colour, hair colour, or even the colour of people's clothing. I am not interested in those aspects of colour that we generally use to differentiate people. I'm talking about those colours that people use to recognise parts of themselves that make up their personalities. And this is done on a subliminal level. Colours, when you ask a person to describe themselves, don't generally jump out and say, pick me. Nor do we generally find that people who will choose colours to describe themselves are necessarily those same colours that they prefer or those colours that they dislike. The colours of personalities are associated with behavioural characteristics, with emotional states, and with the intellectual ways in which people view themselves, their environments, and the relationships around them. So let's get started. Now, this topic is far too large to handle in just one session. So this week, I thought we'd look at just what is meant by personality in the first place, and then how colour is associated with certain personality characteristics. In following sessions, we will then look at individual colours and the personality characteristics that accompany them. So here's part one. Personalities are determined by four basic things, according to one thought in psychology. And these things are firstly genetic makeup. Your genetic makeup has a lot to do with the way in which the biochemical indicators within your body will allow you to respond to situations in your life. But that genetic makeup does not, as far as we know yet, have any links to colour preferences, colour choices, or anything else. What we do know is that neonates will recognise forms and colours even from as early as a few hours of life. Our environment is a second aspect of personality formation, and it's one that I'm more comfortable with because as a sociologist, we study environmental indicators and factors that influence all sorts of behaviour in human beings. Shared family personality is another factor that is perhaps a little less well known, but it's an important one because it comes into effect as we learn while growing up. We take on, we mimic, we copy those behaviours that are shown around us as being the way things are. And in many ways, the personality characteristics that we inherit from our families through our shared family personalities come through as a way of doing things that we consider to be normal. And it doesn't matter how abnormal these characteristics may be from an external perspective, from the perspective of the child growing up in that environment, these are normal. Life experiences will then enable the child to begin to form a separate personality from those of the shared family. They will develop their own unique perspective. And this is where we look at colour personalities fully formed. If we look at the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of a person as they are growing up, we can define personality as a relatively distinct and consistent pattern that involves these ways of thinking, ways of feeling, and the behaviors that occur as a result of those thinking, feeling combinations. A distinct combination of this thinking, feeling, and doing is also, in another train of psychological thought, associated with motivation. Now, here we need to look at Maslow's hierarchy, and we can see here that in that hierarchy, there are a number of different levels of needs, and the lower needs, the more basic needs, need to be fulfilled before any higher need is fulfilled. It also shows that there are different ways of responding. So your personality will be modified by how well these motivators in your life are able to provide ways of doing things differently to the way in which you may have done it earlier. All motivators are linked to stress responses, and some of the most basic stress responses are the fight or flight response. This, according to very early psychological thought, were the basic survival motivations. If you were confronted by a threat, you either fought against it or you ran away from it. That seems to be a fairly consistent response for most creatures on the earth. But how does this relate to colour? Well, we know that our personality develops over time. The personality that we exhibit as a very young infant is totally different to that we experience as an adult, but only insofar as the life experiences will alter the way in which we perceive ourselves, we perceive our relationships, and we perceive those experiences themselves. So the child who is extremely young will have a limited way of dealing with stress responses. Mostly they cry. As the child gets older, they're able to either do the flight or fight issues, or they can in some way intellectualize what is happening around them and make decisions, and those decisions will impinge upon their personalities. Changes with experience occur to all of us, and it doesn't just stop in childhood. As we grow older, as we age, our experiences help to build our personalities, and so we can really say that personality is an ongoing process rather than a fixed aspect of humanity. There are some fairly common concepts of colour that are associated with psychological principles of personality. We've already met the idea that emotions, behaviours, and relationships come together to form our personalities. And as far as emotions go, I've spoken before about Plotchik's emotional colour flower. Now, if you've missed that, I shall put the link for that particular video in the bottom. And as you can see, he associated those emotional responses with specific colours. And those colours are the same colours that we would see or accept as being applicable to those emotions because of the way in which our culture sees colour and the responses that we have to them. Behavioural responses can also be assigned colours. So an orange person is active, energetic, fairly generous and gregarious, whereas a red person is far more likely to be passionate, ambitious, strong-willed, and not just confident, but sometimes downright pushy. A yellow personality is more likely to be responsible, faithful, helpful, sensible. They think their way through things. A purple one is sensitive in a different way. It's supportive, gentle, charismatic. It's a peaceful colour. Blue, on the other hand, is all associated with loyalty, empathy, spirituality, romanticism, and also sincerity, whereas a green personality would be considered to be cynical, introverted, powerful, intellectual, but also fairly calm. But we also have relationships that impinge upon our personalities, are those with our parents, our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, playmates, all sorts of different people that have relationships with us from infancy right through until the day that we leave the earth. If we have good relationships, then we will deal with those other people that we meet in our lives in a harmonious manner. And that harmony is something that we hope happens with most of us. But of course, we cannot get along with everybody because everybody has different relationships that train them in their personalities. So how do we define personality traits? Well, these are the dispositions to behave or act in a particular way depending on the sort of situation in which we find ourselves. And for one group of psychologists, they've divided personality traits into 4 separate color ideas. Firstly, we have the blue person who is emotionally driven and seeking harmony. They're enthusiastic, creative, and fairly sympathetic. Compare that with the gold person, who is loyalty driven rather than emotionally driven, and they respect rules and authority. They're organized and appreciative. The orange personality traits are all about short-term opportunities and short-term rewards. So they welcome change and variety. They're fairly competitive and impulsive, whereas the green personality is driven by logic, and they are people who are independent thinkers, focused, efficient, and analytical. Here is a five trait system. And here we have people who can be either open, extroverted, conscientious, stable, or agreeable. Now, there are also variations on these. A person can be open or closed, extroverted or introverted, conscientious or lazy, stable, unstable, agreeable, and disagreeable. Then we have a 7-trait system. And this one contains a few more colors. So we have red, which is a color of confidence and determination. A person who likes yellow is idealistic, lots of fun, energetic, optimistic, and they have a fairly logical approach to things. A person who prefers orange is fairly good-natured, once again, a very social and ambitious sort of person. A person who likes green as the main color is usually balanced and affectionate. A person who appreciates blue the most is tended to be seen as intelligent and trustworthy. Purple, on the other hand, is associated with creativity, knowledgeability, and being fairly mysterious. And then we have the pink person, who tend to be thoughtful, playful, very romantic, and sensitive. Then we have an 8-trait system. Now here we have 4 basic ideas. We have a group of dominance, a group of influence, a group of steadiness, and a group of conscientiousness. And these basic traits will also have traits that belong in between them. So if we have dominance and influence together, then we can have a fast-paced, dynamic, and inspirational person. If we have influence and the next one, which is steadiness, and we have a warm, collaborative, perceptive sort of person, taking steadiness and associating it with conscientiousness, those two together create a stable, thoughtful, and reliable sort of personality. And finally, if we take conscientiousness and add it to dominance, then we end up with someone who is questioning, challenging, and independent. Generational influences I mentioned earlier, those family characteristics that are passed on. And here is an example of it. If a grandparent treats their adult child in a particular way, that adult child is likely to pass that behavior on to their own offspring, and that child will then treat their younger siblings, their toys, their pets even, in a similar manner. All of those characteristics together form the personality, and that personality is never as clear-cut as simply being one particular type of person or another. It all depends upon the situation, the experience, and how the person is feeling and thinking in the moment. So what do we end up with? Well, the outcome is that very many different types of personalities can arise from a very similar type of experiential, familial, and genetic characteristics. So even identical twins do not share exactly the same sort of personality. So let's have a quick look at stress again, because stress is the precursor to developing a color personality. The colors of flight or fight reaction are fairly basic. They are a dichotomy. You can only do one or the other. You cannot run away while fighting or fight while you are running away. So that dichotomy sets up a different sort of color response in personality terms. Both of these are active responses. They both have to do with protecting the self. And that's important, because if we didn't have those sorts of responses, our stress levels would go through the roof and we would be totally incapable of existing. But the way in which either fight or flight is chosen is all dependent upon the personality. And the colors that we assign to those personality differences are fairly basic. We know, of course, that the most basic colors of all are black and white. So how do they relate? Well, white personalities tend to reflect the threat. That is, they see the threat and they respond in kind. They meet it at the level in which that threat is brought. So we would say that a fight response would be a white response. Black, on the other hand, acknowledges the extent of the threat. In other words, they gauge how severe it's likely to be and then retreats from it rather than face it head on. It is much safer to get away from the threat if you have a black personality. And so flight would be a black response. But stress isn't just as simple as fight or flight. There is a third reaction, and that reaction is freeze. It's a black response, just like flight was a black response. Only this time, instead of physically removing the body, it does so by removing the mental body. It's also basically protective. It causes immobility. The child is incapable of doing anything. It simply stands still. It escapes into the mind. The mind allows itself to depersonalize from the body. But it also causes hypervigilance. So the freeze response is one in which they become very vigilant to all sorts of stresses at all times. But even though we have now fight, flight, and freeze, there is a fourth reaction that is possible. And this fourth reaction is another white reaction. It is fawn. It deflects attention away from the threat. And it does so by being agreeable. Okay, you're angry with me about something. Well, I'll go along with accepting that anger. And now what do you want me to do? It allows for submissiveness. The person is able to get away from the threat simply by doing whatever the threatening creature or experience wants it to do. It seeks approval. Someone who fawns will go out of their way to make the aggressor less damaging, less dangerous to them. And it also causes dissociation, where the person is incapable of recognizing their own fears. They're simply focused on making the aggressor less aggressive, less dangerous to themselves. So, in summary, we have here two white responses and we have two black responses. The white response is the fight response, primary one, which is all about getting angry and combative and making a lot of noise, being demanding, controlling, and defensive, or a fawn response, which is showing anxiety, pleasing people. Don't create any boundaries, just allow the person to do what they like with you, being flattering, can't speak up for yourself, and you are easily controlled. The black personality response, on the other hand, can be flight as the primary one, where the person is fearful, anxious, they avoid the situation, they procrastinate, they withdraw, and they hide. Or it can be freeze, in which they become overwhelmed with a feeling of helplessness, they shut down mentally, zone out, become unresponsive, and tend to isolate themselves. Those are the 4 stress responses and the basic colors that we associate with them. There are a number of different personality self-tests that are available on the internet. This one's a fairly basic one, which uses that 4-color personality, the gold, green, blue, and orange. And it consists of 20 questions based on 5 different sections, each of them with 4 questions. And the idea is that you look at each of the words within a section and then label it as being very applicable right through to not applicable at all. And just simply take the general idea of the various words that are encompassed in each of those squares, give yourself a score, and then add them all up. And that will then tell you how strong you are in each of those 4 different personality characteristics. I've got the link here, but I will also put it down in the description for you. So that's it for the basic personality theory. There's a lot more to it when we start looking at how personality colors are formed, and that's something that I'll start dealing with next time. I hope you have found this summary of personality interesting. Certainly there is plenty of literature out there that will corroborate most of what I have presented here today. Please, if you've liked the video, give it a like, maybe subscribe, certainly leave a comment. I'd really like to hear from you. Until next time, bye.